Thank you, Jill. I'd like to call to order the January 4th meeting of the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force. That's January 4th, 2021. So all of us are starting the year here together. It's good to see all of you. We have a couple of changes to the agenda. Barry, unfortunately, will not be able to join us this morning. So item number 4, that's the item regarding the county council resolution regarding affirming racism is a public health crisis. That item will be scheduled when Barry can be here, so likely the February meeting. Also, Ann Deacon will need to leave for a crisis stabilization meeting at 10. So I think that'll flow with the agenda anyway, but we're gonna make sure we try to get her stuff done prior to her having to leave. And I think that's it for agenda changes. And with that, Stephen, take it away.
Happy New Year, everyone. We'll begin with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. We'll move to the next agenda item, which is number 2, election of task force chair and vice chair and committee assignment. I'm going to separate those two and ask if there are any nominations for task force chair and for co-chair. I'm hearing none.
I'd be willing to entertain a motion to nominate Jack Hobanier and Stephen Gockley as chairs, chair and co-chair, if they are so willing.
Second.
Yeah, I accept. And just to point out, we are co-chairs. There is not a distinguish, there's no difference between the two positions. So it's co-chair, co-chair.
Okay.
Did I just read that, by the way?
No, it was just an oversight that we had on the agenda.
I would accept the nomination as well. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second that Jack Hobanier and Stephen Gockley serve as co-chairs for the task force for the coming 2 years, I believe is the term. Jill, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Hey, and Jill, before we move forward, it looks to me like we have a quorum, but can we confirm that for the audio? I believe we do have a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
Okay.
Great. So I'll call the question and ask all those in favor of Jack Hobanier and Stephen Gockley as co-chairs of the task force, say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. Any recusals? Well, we are re-elected. Thank you very much, everyone. Jill,
Does it come with a raise this time?
yes, I believe it does. Cost of living.
Maybe an overnight at the new crisis stabilization would be nice in a private room.
as many as needed.
All right.
Jill, prior to the meeting, distributed a list of committee signups that allocated positions on the committees to us on the task force. I hope everyone has had a chance to look at that and inform her of any corrections you wanted. at this point,
Stephen, I've got some information on that. So I talked.
oh,
to Jill
please,
before the
please go
meeting.
ahead.
Okay, so just two things. First, acknowledge Judge Garrett here for her last meeting with us, but we did slot Judge Freeman into Judge Garrett's place tentatively. That's not reflected on your packet, page 1. And if Judge Freeman wants to be in a different position, we can certainly do that. But so we had him at Legal and Justice Systems Committee. And then it's probably important to note under behavioral health, there are 3 proposed new members. Under legal and justice, I know we have Danelle Tanksley. I guess my point is I want to make sure everyone understands this is the point in the year where people who are not members, seated members of the full task force can be added by the task force to our subcommittees. So if you take a look at that list and make sure it meets with your approval, this is the time we do that. I'm not sure everyone knew that that this is the place where we do that.
Jack, could I say something? I think you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
This is Judge Garrett, and I wanted to say 2 things, actually. First of all, I wanted to thank you and Stephen and all of the people who've worked so hard on this task force over the years that I've been here. We've made so much progress, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done here and the work of the task force generally. I think we've been quite successful, and we're not sitting on laurels by any means. We're moving forward, and that too is a good thing. I'm going to continue in the work group that's a part of the Legal and Justice Subcommittee. I'm going to continue as a volunteer in that group, and as the liaison from the Superior Court, Judge Freeman will be replacing me both in the work group in the official capacity and on the task force. And I think Judge Freeman is just an excellent selection. I already know that he's an excellent judge, but his background as a former prosecutor and then as a judicial officer for many years before he was appointed to our bench and then of course elected to our bench, serve him in good stead. He understands the system. He has a lot of experience in pretrial rulings because he served as a pro tem for Superior Court for many years. He was our go-to pro tem. And I just think he brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise as well as good judgment and integrity. I'm very happy that he's on the bench, and I think you all will be very happy to have him join you on the task force. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're also, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're very happy you're willing to volunteer, and instead of replacing you, we're adding someone. And we appreciate your willingness to continue, Judge Garrett, on the Legal and Justice Systems Committee.
Thank you.
It'll be an honor to keep working with you, Judge Garrett, and Judge Freeman, welcome. And we look forward to picking up with nary a glitch.
Raylene?
Nary a glitch, yes.
Thank you. And I do want to thank Judge Garrett for her willingness to stay on and get me up to speed as well.
Thank you, Judge Freeman. Congratulations. We're excited to have you. Raylene,
So
your hand up.
I believe we are looking for a motion to accept the committee sign up with the information that Jack provided as background.
Stephen, we have some hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ann?
Okay. No, we have Raylene first and then Ann.
I'm sorry.
Her hand's been up. For, yeah.
I just wanted to thank again Judge Garrett for everything she's done and willingness to participate in the future, as well as I really am excited for Judge Freeman to get started on this committee. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about him, but I'm not going to keep you all here on that. I also wanted to note that I did send an email recently to Chief Turner with Ferndale Police Department and Chief Tanksley. Chief Tanksley expressed interest in being more involved in these committees as well as the full task force when available. And I know that Chief Turner is a very busy man as well. And so the hope is that maybe the two of them can tag team on some of the meetings. I'm still waiting for response, but hopefully we can add them together in some form. otherwise, I'm looking forward to the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Raylene. And we can add people to the subcommittees at any meeting of the task force. Pam?
So I just want to point out, can you hear me? Great. The Behavioral Health Committee, the very last one, proposed new member health department staff with behavioral health and substance use disorder experience. I think that's just a typo. Perry Mowry already fulfills that requirement. And I'm thinking, and Dan Hamill, I'm checking with you, but I think we were going to recommend a citizen in the community that has this expertise. But this last line is just a duplicate. I'm just thinking we can fix that later, but I just wanted to bring that to the attention. I didn't want us to think we were putting 2 department staff on this committee.
That's correct.
Eric Ritchie?
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that I think I was left off of the Legal and Justice Committee. I think I'm supposed to be on it, but it's possible that I'll be placing someone to replace me on that committee. And I was wondering if I could have more time to do that.
Yeah, we've got your name down there 2/3 of the way down. Would you ask that it be removed, or we can replace it any time?
Okay, well, I might do that, and I'm thinking about that over this next week. And the original copy that I was sent, I did not have my name on it, but
Oh, okay. Packet page 1, somebody must have caught the mistake. It would be certainly your presence or your office's presence is integral to that. So
great, thank you.
I didn't recognize you at first with the beard. I'm like, who is it? All right.
Are there any other questions or corrections or additions? May we have a motion to accept the committee sign up as revised by this discussion?
So moved.
Second, and seconded. It's been moved and seconded to accept the committee assignments for the coming year. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
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 No. Oh, okay. Motion is passed.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Motion is passed. So Jack, I'll turn this back over to you to proceed with the meeting schedules.
Yeah, this is, I think, pretty straightforward. On your packet, page 2, there's a list of dates and meetings, a little bit of background that may be helpful. The main task force meetings are a bit of a juggling act between the City of Bellingham City Council and other things, so those probably aren't available to move too much. And the practice has been the subcommittees have occasionally either canceled or moved dates based on the needs of the committee. What we would be looking for today, though, is to go into 2021 with this calendar and the understanding that, of course, if the subcommittees believe they need to modify it, they're certainly free to do so, but it's obviously there's a lot of busy people and it's helpful to have a calendar and the meeting schedule for the year. So we would look for any obvious edits that need to be made, and if there aren't, any, a motion to approve the calendar as presented in packet page 2.
I so move. This is Darlene Peterson.
Thank you, Darlene.
I second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of approving the IPR Task Force and Committee 2021 meeting schedule, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed or anyone who wants to be an abstention? Okay, so seeing none, that Jill, you've got the calendar. It makes your life easier. With that, Ann, we're going to move to you, the Crisis Stabilization Center opening. And if you want to weave the behavioral health crisis response expansion into that, or we can treat them as separate items, however you'd like to proceed.
Sure, thank you. So we were slated to open today, the new Crisis Stabilization Center. We have missed our mark, and I am sad to report that. However, we do believe we'll be up and running before the end of this week. There were 1,000 details, as you can imagine, that not all got addressed. But we also did a brief recording tour of the facility, but again, that was not as we had hoped, in the sense that there were still unpacked boxes and things around the facility. So we'll still try to get a virtual tour of that facility before we open. Once we have clients there, obviously we can't take a video of the facility. We also are putting together with the executive's office a virtual ribbon cutting, just so that we have some of our local elected officials and our community leaders providing some comments. As always, we want to thank Representative Shoemake for her efforts in helping us secure some state funds to help with operational costs. And we'll be working with the new Representative Alicia Rule on ensuring that we have the money necessary to operate an involuntary treatment capacity for the mental health side of that center. And part of that effort is really to make sure that law enforcement can divert people from arrest or incarceration directly to this facility, and that if they do not meet, quote, medical necessity required by the health insurance companies to cover it, that there's still money to cover their treatment course. And just as a reminder, this is going to be an average of 3 to 5 days of treatment and stabilization. And the real purpose is to stabilize somebody and get them connected to ongoing services. As we finalize our programming, we will give you more information about that. We do not yet have it confirmed that we can open as an involuntary triage facility, but as you can imagine, we're working fast and furious on that. So part of our program advisory committee meeting that meets regarding this involves law enforcement representatives to help put together that program. Any questions about the Crisis Stabilization Center? If you haven't driven by, I would recommend it. It's great. It's a beautiful building. It looks inviting and homey, not like an institution. It is not an institution, and we don't want it to look like that to the community. And we will be working with a number of people on a communication effort as we roll out the programming. So more to come on that. There's a lot. We're behind in a lot of ways, simply because of construction issues and because of certification of programming issues.
And one quick question. Are there any press releases planned? And if so, is it possible to get a copy?
I'll work with the county exec's office on that. And yes, we'll make sure this entire committee has a copy of that.
Okay, I was just thinking for the TV stuff, but great. So when there's a press release, it'll have some facts and details that'll be useful for reporting.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for doing that too, Jack. Okay, the behavioral health crisis response expansion. This is an effort underway in response to some of the requests from some community leaders to see if there's a way we can expand a behavioral health response to crises that perhaps law enforcement either doesn't need to be involved in or respond to, or at least not finish the call through completion. And so I think I shared this, I don't recall if I shared it with the entire committee or if just a subcommittee, but the purpose of our work right now is to really achieve 3 things. One is to safely reduce unnecessary law enforcement responses to people in behavioral health crisis. A second one is obviously to improve behavioral health response and services and support to people experiencing distress and crises. And then third, to improve our systems of care and coordination. We have quite a few different programs in place, and we want to make sure that not only they coordinate seamlessly with one another, but that we can fill in as many gaps as we possibly can, knowing that historically our behavioral health system has been very underfunded, not only in our county, but throughout the nation. So there is a regular weekly meeting of people that are very active in putting together this program expansion. Obviously, Grace Management is very closely tied to this work. And there is consideration that maybe this will be yet another program under the umbrella of Grace so that we can maximize coordination and collaboration. We also have law enforcement participation from both Bellingham Police Department and County Sheriff right now, soon to include other municipalities. We have behavioral health providers that have either done this work or know of this work from other states. And then we also have our current mobile crisis outreach team manager participating as well in the planning. So we've got all the right people at this core program. We also invite some of our community leaders, elected officials, to keep them updated and get their input. And as we move forward, the plan is not only to put together a general proposal for how we're going to expand these services, but then to hold community stakeholder meetings to get input on the planning process and making sure that we have met the needs to the greatest extent possible, as well as the expectations of our community. And then once we get the community input, we get back to rolling up our sleeves and finalizing the details of the programming, figuring out not only who might provide these services, but how we're going to fund them. As you can imagine, those are huge, huge issues, usually the most important. We already have done the research in terms of the different programs throughout the state as well as the nation. We've identified common elements of those successful programs. We've looked at what we have currently in our community and then what gaps we might be looking to fill. And so that's how we're putting together this planning process. So we hope by spring to have a proposal, the first draft proposal ready to vet to the community for them to provide lots of input, hopefully lots of feedback, so we can fine tune and redirect our efforts where necessary. Questions? This is a huge, huge process. As you already know, the GRACE program is up and running, extremely successful. Our outcomes have far exceeded our initial expectations. We've been working very closely with the prosecuting attorney's office to incorporate the LEAD program under the umbrella of GRACE, keeping LEAD distinct and separate, keeping GRACE distinct and separate, and yet maximizing the collaboration and coordination necessary to ensure success. And we will be doing the same with this next program as well. We don't have a name for it yet. We may name it, we may not. So, questions, thoughts?
Oh, Arlene and then Dan.
Oh, I'm happy for you. I'm happy for us. When you say it's huge, it's huger. It's the umbrella for all the other things that we're doing. Without these services working smoothly and fluidly, the other things we do couldn't be successful. So I'm very grateful and happy and to hear that there's going to be some sort of coordinated plan and that you're working on that. It's really terrific. And I know we'll get the money.
And I think what's really important, Arlene, is for us to make sure that all of these things that we're designing or improving or enhancing are connected to everything else, to include the new Crisis Stabilization Center. And as the programming for the center evolves, so will we have to evolve all these other programs.
Yes, all the social services are part of an enormous web. If you think of it as a giant web of connection, like a spider web. And what we've been complaining about and working on, of course, are these gaps, which we talk about all the time, but are really big and important. And so as we fill them and as the web gets connected totally across the whole social service system, because that's really what we're talking about. It's all connected, absolutely. And with the gaps people fall through, when we close them, it just starts to work. So yeah, this is fabulous.
Dan?
I'm wondering if Ms. Deacon can provide some examples of the types of calls that responders would go to as part of this program, just for the public.
Certainly, we're at the very infancy of that effort, but we did take a look at, for instance, the Whatcom calls that came in and what the responses were, what the outcomes were. And so there are things like, there were welfare checks, for instance, a lot of requests through 911 for welfare checks, where out of over 2,000 requests over a certain period of time, only one ended up in some type of need for force. So obviously, when our goal is to safely reduce law enforcement responses, we really are underlining and emphasizing the need for safety. We can't provide a program if we can't ensure the safety of our responders. And obviously, unarmed citizens won't have the same resources that law enforcement does. But that's one example where there might be somebody who has been, it could be somebody experiencing homelessness who's been laying in the same place for quite a few hours that people are concerned about. And that might be a reasonable response for a team of behavioral health responders as opposed to law enforcement to make sure the person is okay and do they have the connections to, or access to services that they need? If they're not interested, is there a way that we could figure out how to provide some interest in connecting them? So that's one example where we were really looking at a lot of data to help us determine not only the safety issues, but the resources that might best be used.
Really?
I just want to emphasize that I understand the reasoning for this push, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I really have strong concern about safety of any social workers, and I'm sure that Sheriff Elfo and Chief Simon will be of great assistance. I recall many years ago going to a call of an individual lying in front of a business in a sleeping bag near the border. And it was assuming that it was just going to be, you know, we just need to move this guy on and see if he needs some assistance in finding a better location. It turned out he had several weapons on him. And that was definitely a concern that a social worker might not have known all the weapons that were laying in his sleeping bag just by the call of a welfare check. So it just, safety is number one when it comes to stuff like that. And I would hope that that the sheriff and Chief Simon would be able to give guidance on making sure that anything that's done is to protect the social workers as well as help the people that need mental health assistance. Thank you.
I appreciate that And I'll say two things. One is the outcome for this program is not that unarmed citizens are the responder. That's just a possible component of a program enhancement, but it's not necessarily the outcome. In talking with the sheriff's office, it is quite clear that at this point in time, there would be no way for an unarmed team, for instance, who needed backup to get the backup response in the amount of time required, simply because we have a large county geographically, and distance creates problems for timely responses. And so what we might employ within city limits might look different than what we would do in rural areas. And an unarmed response is not the sole outcome. And I just want to say that we've talked a lot about the concerns for safety, not to mention the fact that it doesn't make sense to create a program that you can't staff. So if we can't ensure safety of staff because we have a reasonably designed program, then we haven't met our goal.
Any other questions, comments? All right, Stephen, I think then we're going to move to committee updates. Maybe you or I could do steering committee, but I thought since Ann is on a schedule, Ann, I apologize. I know you've been talking a lot, but if you want to add anything for the Crisis Stabilization Facility Committee, I thought we might go out of order and give you the chance to do that before you need to leave.
I think I said most of what I needed. I did submit a one-page report to be included in a general incarceration prevention and reduction task force update. And I guess I'll just repeat the fact that this is a building over 24,000 square feet. It has more contraptions, wiring, cable, smoke dampers, fire dampers, more than you can imagine just up in the ceiling itself. This is a very, very complicated building, and it has been a huge challenge. And I really want to thank not only Tiger Construction, but our architect, Ron Wright, who's been, you know, working really hard to try to get this going. I think the COVID pandemic has made it very difficult in terms of delivery of materials, to include furniture. You know, we're no different than anyone else in this country in terms of some of the challenges we've faced because of the COVID pandemic as well. So I'm just eager to get it up and running. And once it's up and running, then the real work comes with us making sure that the program is running as we expect it, and all the tweaks and improvements that need to be done over that first year, especially.
And any questions for Ann on the Crisis Stabilization Facility Committee? Stephen, do you want to, I've got the steering committee minutes. Do you want to say what happened? You want me to say what happened? Barry's not here.
I can cover that, and then
Perfect.
you can carry on the rest.
Oh,
of
no,
the,
I was going to say, why don't you carry on from that point? You can call on the
Okay.
other committee. All right, sounds good. Go ahead.
That's fine. So you have in your packet very brief minutes from a shorter than usual steering committee meeting on December 10th. You'll note from those that essentially our topics were issues that are on the agenda and that we are discussing today. The committee schedule and the task force schedule for the coming year, the agenda items with a focus on the behavioral health crisis response developments and the rollout of the Crisis Stabilization Center. We want to keep working on those topics, keeping the task force as a whole informed as those programs develop. We have a legislative session coming up, and we want to keep track of issues relative to funding and other behavioral health services that start to come out of the session, or at least are taken up in the session. And I think that really was the totality of the steering committee meeting. If anybody on the steering committee wants to add any detail to that summary, I'm welcome to allow time for it. If there are any questions from any of the task force members about the steering committee discussions, glad to entertain those as well. Okay. Hearing none, then Arlene and/or Raylene, would you mind, and I guess Dan and Mike, if there was a joint meeting of the Legal and Justice Systems and the Behavioral Health Committee meeting, if any of you or all of you would like to report on those, we'd appreciate it.
I would like Arlene and Dan to state what they have to say about the last meeting. I was a little bit out of it that week.
Arlene, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, what stood, there were so many things we covered. If you look at the notes, it's pretty enormous set of topics and reports with a lot of detail. But I guess I tried to think about, what stood out for me as a repetitious themes in what we were covering. And a lot of it was changes in the way that we respond to things because of the virus, that interfered or delayed or changed statistics a lot of times. That was one thing. The other thing that was repeatedly discussed was the lack of housing. And so this is a theme that we keep hearing, and we're going to keep hearing it until we take care of it. And so I'm talking about it now because I think wherever we work, whatever part of the social system we work in, we have to press for housing changes so that we don't have to deal with this all the time, because it's a big part of the gaps in our system.
Okay, I'm just looking at the notes here.
Dan, this is, oh, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead, Mike, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna, in addition to what Arlene said, obviously we had a very in-depth presentation on Grace and Lead, which was really informative, but we also got some racial data from the jail. And I think this is particularly useful for the task force to think about as we start looking more closely and with a finer pine on racial equity in our system. We'll really have to pay attention to that data. And I guess just calling out in the minutes, we had a really good presentation on the kind of the demographics of folks in the jail, but that the federal government changes in how demographics are captured has bearings on what we have locally. So I think along with Arlene's idea of one of the themes that pull out is it's not always going to be easy for us to do the work that we need to do. And we'll have to be really concerted to be able to get the data that we need. Dan, I'll yield to you for the rest.
Okay. I'm just taking a look at the notes here. One thing I wanted to point out, this is an improvement in my opinion. This was Stephen Gockley's idea that we would put in the time during the meeting per subject. So update on impacts and effects of policy changes was noted at 35 minutes and 28 seconds. That's an improvement for the public to access these often tedious meetings that are very detail oriented. There's a lot going on. So I just wanted to point that out for the public to understand that we're trying to make this more accessible. These meetings are all recorded now on Zoom. So they're the video recorded so you can take a look, and if you're interested in any of the topics here. This was a big meeting between the Behavioral Health Committee and the Legal and Justice Committee members to discuss a range of topics, as both Mike and Arlene indicated. We did talk about drug court and mental health court at length. There's a number of issues here that's in all that information is in the packet for you to take a look at here. We talked about drug court working with housing providers for about 160 beds for their clients for approximately 3 months of clean and sober housing, and that more clean and sober housing is needed for females, families, and clients on Suboxone. That program's a 52-week program, and members do that entire time in that program. We also talked about DWLS, which is driving while license suspended third, which is prosecutor's office took that as a standalone charge and dismissed over 350 pending charges. To me, that seems like an improvement. The ACLU has been calling for that for quite some time now, and I want to commend the prosecutor's office for the vision on that one. We also talked about SOCs, stipulated orders of continuance that were offered for low-level cases, but very few people took the offers due to the lack of trials and consequences during COVID pandemic here. We also talked about lead integration with Grace. There was a substantial amount of information on that one. I would encourage folks that are interested in knowing a little bit more about that to go back and review the video of that. And then as Mr. Parker indicated, we talked about racial population of the jail, and then also reentry contracts with MCOs, the managed care organizations. There were some other items that we discussed, mostly kind of housekeeping items, but I think that probably concludes the report out.
If I could make one comment on that.
Please, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, as I've said in past meetings, that data from the jail is not going to reflect the number of people that are involved in the criminal justice system. Actually, the majority of criminal charges are initiated with a citation or with filing with the prosecutor, as opposed to booking them into jail after court time. They may end up being incarcerated, but I just don't want anybody to be misled that they could look at that and get the true picture on how many people are criminal justice involved.
Thank you. I would just like to ask one item you'll see that was discussed in this joint meeting might benefit from some update. And while we have Ann still with us, I'd like to ask her to fill us in. Notice that the Legal and Justice Systems Subcommittee has been keeping an eye on the question of reentry services to reduce the recycling of people getting out of jail without supports and recidivism potentially as a result of that. That's been a thorny issue of late, and Ann made a report of some negotiations with the managed care organizations in that regard. Ann, is there anything to update us on with respect to reentry services in the managed care organizations?
So I'm going to tax my memory here. Oh, we are certainly still working with the 5 health insurance plans who I think are slowly recognizing their obligations. I think they didn't fully understand what they were obligated to do relative to their contracts with the state healthcare authority. And I think they are starting to understand that maybe they're going to need the help from a more local resource to accomplish their objectives. And so we are still in process of working with them as well as the Regional Administrative Service Organization to put together something more robust. We also received some other funding from the state. And so I think our hope right now is to increase the reentry position currently in the jail from half-time to full-time.
You're muted, Raylene.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
We can hear you, Ann.
Oh, there we go. I could hear you.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, a glitch.
Thank you, Ann, for the update on the reentry. I would really like to see that going to full time, so that's excellent. Just a couple things, even though I wasn't able to make the meeting, based on some of the notes and what some of the things that I just wanted to update. On the DWLS thirds with what Prosecutor Ritchie does, that does not reflect the small cities. The prosecutors have not, in the small cities, have not made the same choice, and those charges are still being proceeded as normal, and the judges are still dealing with them as required by law. So that didn't affect. Things that the COVID is definitely affecting the trials because we're not having jury trials, so things keep getting postponed. Also, I have seen an 81% increase in warrants since last year. So there is definitely things that are being impacted, and hopefully we'll be able to change that. We are heavily utilizing friendship diversion services right now for home detention in lieu of jail, but that doesn't work for everybody. And a lot of people know that they're not going to go to jail right now for very long. So we're seeing a revolving door and problems. That's it.
Anything else on the joint meeting between legal and justice systems and behavioral health in November? If not, Dan or Mike, you had a subsequent behavioral health meeting in December. Minutes are included. Any reports you want to make from there? All right.
Mike, do you want to just cover the GARE piece? I don't know if Mr. Parker's still on the line. It was a brief meeting. We had the GARE is the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. This is just an update basically. And then we also had an update on the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, which launched late last year. And we had a meeting with a number of stakeholders in the local electeds, basically. And we'll have another meeting on January 28th for other stakeholders as well for the LEAD program. And just looking at the notes here, and I think that was pretty much it. It was kind of a short meeting. And that's it.
Yeah, just to add one comment to that, I think some of the focus on the GARE perspective was the interplay between effectively introducing the racial equity toolkit analysis and the data that we need and are developing within Index was highlighted, and there was some brainstorming that went on about that. Caleb, I saw you here. Are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Can you update us on the Index Committee?
Gladly. Happy New Year, everybody. We had a number of things discussed at a recent meeting, but just for sort of an overall scope, and we're dusting off our memory banks about what Index has been up to and about. We've been working over the past years to try to integrate and compile information from various different systems throughout the county to get a better understanding of what the criminal justice system looks like from a data perspective. And so one of the first presentations that we had in the committee meeting was an update from the administrative offices of the courts. The administrative office of the courts is really in charge of all essentially state level information, and they provided an update that they're trying to integrate all court systems and in terms of data management throughout the entire state of Washington onto one platform. It's Tyler Technologies platform, similar to, but not the exact same as what Superior Court has moved to. This undertaking is massive when you consider that there are many times the number of jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction has their own way of categorizing data and allocating things. And so this is a very big project, but we got some hopeful news that they're starting to roll out a conversion to this. It won't be every jurisdiction all at once. There'll be a selective jurisdictions doing a trial, and then they'll move that forward in the coming months. And I believe they're hopeful at this point of having it rolled out this year or next in terms of timing on that. And so again, that's a huge step forward for us in terms of data collection and being able to understand what's going on in the greater criminal justice system throughout all of the state of Washington. So next, Barry Buchanan provided an update on the MacArthur Grant program that was about racial and ethnic data. So he talked about sort of the steps that they had taken so far and what the group is working on. There's a network of 15 counties that we're working to sort of take the lead on racial and ethnic data. And so they've got some further development and implementation to work on there. We also talked about sort of the data matrix that we've developed for Whatcom County. We've been maintaining a data matrix that includes information from all of the partners in Whatcom County that gather some sort of criminal justice related data. And there are definitely some gaps in our ability to track things. As the sheriff mentioned earlier, we rely fairly heavily on information that comes out of the jail, but that is not a complete picture of what's going on in our criminal justice system. And so being able to understand that there are additional data capturing software, some records management softwares that are coming online in the coming year, both with the public defender's office and with the prosecutor's office for Whatcom County, that may actually help immensely to understand some of the ins and outs of the data going forward. As Mike Parker mentioned earlier, we talked briefly about an issue that was an FBI mandated change in our database that has sort of run afoul of our data tracking for ethnicity. Specifically, we were tracking Hispanic individuals in a particular field, and that field had to be updated without the Hispanic code. And so all of our Hispanic ethnicities have been erased for the time being. And so we've started basically from ground zero. The starting point was sometime in 2019. So having to go back through, and anytime somebody comes into the jail system, we update their ethnicity, but it's a separate field, and that change has been problematic for our data collection. So that was worth mentioning. We're hoping to have some more discussion about the statistics for racial and ethnic issues, but we're going to have to figure out exactly, because we talked a little bit about there was a request for information about jury selection and the racial and ethnic balance of that jury selection, but that information, number one, isn't collected, and two, I'm not sure that it's going to be available because of privacy. So there are some issues that we're still trying to figure out whether that's something that can be collected and moving forward. If there are other things like that that we can get data on and get that collected, those are the high points. I think that's it, unless anybody else had anything that I didn't mention.
Questions for Lieutenant Erickson? Dan.
Thanks, Lieutenant Erickson. Appreciate the update. I'm trying to get a handle on, you had mentioned some new platforms may be coming online here this year. And as the sheriff indicated, there's a spectrum of data collection that can take place at arrest, pre-arrest, all the way through booking and incarceration. Do you think that those tools will provide a more clear picture of race and ethnicity, or will that not be a solution, do you think?
I'm hopeful at this point. I don't have a concrete answer because we haven't seen the actual product in place, and to the extent that we're not really sure the interoperability of it, whether the information, say for the public defender's office, may not be available. They can't share some of the information that they have. But the prosecutor's office may be able to provide some information. And I think that it can't but help going to a system that consolidates all of the information, gives us at least the ability, the hope that we'll be able to pull some data points out and say, yep, this is exactly where this, just for example, tracking a single case from one end to the other, say it doesn't even touch the jail, that we don't have any idea what's going on with that information at this point. We might be able to get some information from the courts, but as the courts of limited jurisdiction don't have all of those records, online in all cases, it can be really difficult to track it. So I'm hopeful, but I don't know. I don't have any concrete answer on that one.
Just a comment on Dan and Caleb on what you're stating with the information. So when somebody's book, they're fingerprinted and that record is done. If they're not fingerprinted and the criminal charges are made, it's a cite and release with a mandatory court date. Unless they're fingerprinted by the officer, which doesn't happen most of the time, you're not going to have all that data. When the citations are filed, there is a place now in the citation that's filed that has race and ethnicity in there, and that data can be pulled from AOC. Unfortunately, what I see a lot is a defendant's race and ethnicity changes on a regular basis. The officers don't always know. You get unknown, you get two different races that are put in there. You got people that don't want to provide that information, and you got officers that may be concerned about asking that information when they're citing somebody that's maybe combative or just doesn't want to give up that information. So you got all these factors, and I did run somebody a while back. He had 4 different races. So to get accurate data, even if you're going to pull it from the citations and AOC and the new systems, it's going to be very difficult to make sure that all the information you're getting is accurate.
Yeah, good point, Raylene. And in fact, all of the information that we capture at the jail is voluntary. We don't have any way of verifying, so to speak, any of the information. So if they either A, don't provide information, or they provide information that is inaccurate, we're limited in that way in terms of having good data.
One other question. You see in the Behavioral Health Committee there, we're starting to have to get into discussions about the use of the Racial Equity Toolkit, and that calls on us to base some of our policy recommendations on data, which will have us coming to you, I think, at some point when we actually start using that toolkit. How responsive are our data systems going to be able to be in the near future to requests for data that might be sought to underlie decisions that we're considering?
Yeah, great question. The answer, unfortunately, is depends. I don't, again, have a good handle on how, say, the prosecutor's new system is going to work, or gathering information from that. Certainly the courts, have information at the AOC level, but the ability to mine that information is rather limited. I would say broad brushstroke, it's going to be fairly challenging to get good information rapidly from all parties involved. I know Spillman the best, and Spillman is relatively simple. I'm not simple in construct, but it's easy to get information out of it. But again, it's only as good as what's going in. If we get information that is misinformed, or again, people are self-reporting incorrectly, that can skew the data points. But for Spillman, relatively simple. For fairly certain, everything else is going to be rather complicated.
So just to follow up on that, I think it's the case that most of us would not know where to direct a data request. And I'm not completely sure myself yet how siloed the data remains. So if I could ask the committee to think about maybe one point of entry into data systems, which might be you, or it might be somebody else the committee designates, so that as our committees start to work in a data informed way, we know where to go, at least to start the question, to start the inquiry. That would be helpful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You know, I have a fairly good understanding of the way the data works and flows and so forth, but as you can tell, there isn't one single expert on this, and so it takes everybody to be involved to get that sort of thing going. Jill, I would ask that you add that to our meeting agenda, and I've got a note to add that here as well. We've got a meeting coming up on the 7th. So
I will do that. Also, Mike Parker has his hand raised.
Mike, go ahead. Looks like you're still muted, Mike. Mike?
My
There you go.
apologies. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry about that. Stephen, my hand was raised and I think you already addressed my question, which was about racial and equity data. And it was only just to clarify, might there be opportunities, not just with systems, but with processes? If they ever saw any opportunities, I mean, they were talking about, looking at citations. Could we in any way find opportunity for better fidelity to good data keeping through enhanced procedures or processes when we capture?
and I think honestly, there's an opportunity here for some better data collection at a higher level. The challenge that I think that would address both that question and the question 4 is we store information in so many different silos, as Stephen said, that it's not easily accessible. And it would be much easier for me to say, hey, let's grab information from one consolidated resource. But that resource doesn't exist at this point. And, I'm not sure if there is, some off-the-shelf software or somewhere, a manufacturer makes a software that we can use to integrate all of that data. But that's one key concern of mine, is that we've got to have some way to get the information consolidated and gathered, and then we can mine it more effectively, and it'll better inform our moving forward.
Verlene and Dan.
So Mike, on the citations and stuff, it'll be interesting, I think, probably 2022. There are some courts rolling out in the spring of this year to the new Odyssey program that's courts of limited jurisdiction. So then at the end of the year, or hopefully the beginning of next year, you'll see all the courts in the state of Washington on the Odyssey, including Superior and courts of limited jurisdiction. So there's a possibility some of that data might be easier to obtain, but I still think it's going to be skewed because one, on citations, they're only issued on criminal charges that are misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. They are not issued on felony charges, but felony charges are usually booked. So you're going to have the booking information when they're fingerprinted. So once again, as Caleb pointed out, you have two different systems. You have some people that are being booked, some people that aren't being booked, and then you're going to have people that are reporting different races and ethnicities or none at all upon arrest or booking. So the data is still going to be somewhat skewed, but there is hope in the future that with all the courts going to the same similar program, you might be able to pull some of it.
Thanks, Raylene.
I think Raylene kind of got to my point. It's really concerning that we've got all these different silos and data collection platforms and programs, or whatever you want to call them, throughout the county. And this was not giving us an accurate reading on the information that we need. And so I'm hopeful, Raylene, that Odyssey, the migration to Odyssey will address some of those issues, but we're kind of flying blind here. And it's just very frustrating. I'm just registering that without the data, it's hard for us to really move forward in this process. And we've adopted this. We've adopted the GARE, the toolkit, but without the data, I don't see a pathway forward for us to implement it in a way that's going to be completely meaningful. So I'm hopeful that the index committee can work towards solutions. And I realize it's not the only authority in the county, but it's just really challenging when we have courts of limited jurisdiction and municipalities all kind of doing their own thing. So I'm hopeful that, I don't know, Raylene, if you can provide a ray of hope on Odyssey. But if I don't see a pathway forward, and it's very frustrating for me.
Mr. Hamill, that was identified back in 2002, almost 20 years ago, by the Law and Justice Committee. And there was a solution proposed back then, and it was never funded and never was developed or never became to fruition. So it's a continuing saga with the 11 different court systems we have in Whatcom County, if you include the tribal courts as well.
In addition, again, I echo your frustration, Mr. Hamill. I completely understand, and that's why, I think that the Index Committee was formed to kind of manage this issue, and it's become a very challenging point. I think that to the best of our ability, Index has done what we can to expose, any sort of what we have there, what's available, and to share that information as freely as possible. But it has definitely exposed some weaknesses in terms of what we actually have available to us and how we can gather that information. You're absolutely right. To make informed and meaningful movement forward, we have to understand what it is that the data is telling us. And until we get a better handle on that, it can be very frustrating. And I completely echo that.
I just want to be clear that my frustration is not directed at any person or it's more of like the system. We all know this stuff. I mean, and we're all working on towards, trying to make things better. But so I just want to make sure that Lieutenant Erickson, this is not directed at you or anyone else on this call. I just want to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, all oars in the same direction in the water. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't feel that way at all. I appreciate that.
Lieutenant Erickson referenced new software being considered in the prosecutor's office and the public defender's office. And Eric and Lisa, you're both on this call, and you're both members of the Index Committee. Would the task force benefit from any updates from either of you on time frame and content and interoperability of the systems that you're looking at?
Maya, do you want to go first?
Sure. Perry, we're setting up our meetings for January to figure out the purchase and implementation of Defender data. So we're really at just the beginning stages, but we have the funding. So now it's just getting the ball rolling. It's going to be a pretty intensive project for our office because we're going to have to input all of the data that we have in hard files and then transition to a paperless program. So I expect it's going to be probably the entire year of 2021 if we start in January. In terms of the kinds of, I'm very optimistic about the kinds of reports that can be generated with the information we'll be inputting. But I have, I think, asked Anne in the past for that maybe maybe that's the MacArthur grant. It's some grant that the health department or the county was part of that allowed experts to provide advice rather than a money grant. And I had suggested that it might be wise to have maybe use those experts to help us formulate the reports we need to be generating. I haven't heard about that opportunity, but whatever help we can get, we'll take, and we're going to be working on developing those reports. Thanks.
So I'll tell you, we're very optimistic about how this software is going to affect our office, and we think it's going to come relatively soon. We made a decision immediately when we were offered an opportunity to get a software program. We knew exactly what we wanted. We've seen that other prosecutors' offices have been successful using them. so we took the one that was the most commonly used in Washington State. And again, the funding's been approved, as Maya said, and we expect that we're going to be able to start implementing it during this calendar year. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I expect that it's going to take quite a long time. Again, it's going to be a lot of intensive information that has to be put in, and it's going to be all hands on getting it in. And I think, as Caleb talked about it, it's the information that we're able to extract out of it. It's going to be as good as the information that we put in it. And I can tell you though that we think it's going to be significantly better than what we've had in the past. Currently, our system is so bad that we can hardly extract any information out of it. So we are hopeful that we're going to be able to get good information for the task force and for the rest of the community.
And I'll just follow up with each of you. As things look now, are you thinking that we're simply building better or more spacious silos, or are you looking at integration of your data with other system data?
Great, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you mentioning that. I meant to say that. So our software system is going to be very compatible. We're going to be able to provide information to the public defender's office when we send it to them. It's going to be part of the system that they get information from us. And we're going to be able to integrate back and forth through Spellman as well as Longarm. So we're feeling pretty good about that.
My understanding is we'll be able to download and receive discovery materials from the prosecutor, but obviously our internal records are going to be highly protected. I mean, that's going to include all attorneys' notes and our interviews, et cetera. So I think the reports that we're going to be able to generate will only be from data that we input and have possession of. Like, we won't be able to reach out and pull. The data sharing is very controlled, I guess I would say. So I think we're going to be able to get reports from each agency or each department, and then maybe we can compare them, and that'll tell us about the quality of information we're putting in and how that's working to see how accurate they are.
And I just wanted to echo what Maya said. It makes perfect sense that they receive information, but they not give information. We don't want that. That's not what should happen in this system.
Understanding the attorney-client confidentiality issues and concern about sharing certain data, does the new program have like a SharePoint or tool that will allow you to pull out ethnicity or racial data from the reports that are given to you from the outside agencies?
Yeah, I'm sure that it will, but it's going to be a matter of the information that we receive. As you mentioned, Raylene, getting information from individuals is hard, and getting information from officers is hard as well, because as you mentioned, boy, it's tough to gather that information. So, we're only going to be working with the type of information that we're able to get together. And that's just about the way it works.
Questions on data issues or tied more closely to Caleb's index committee report? Okay, thank you, Caleb. Appreciate the work you're doing and the information you've provided us. Jack, you want to take the next agenda item?
Sure, the update by jurisdictions.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if we let the jurisdictions know ahead of time. So I guess this would probably be, typically it's been the sheriff and Darlene, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if you've got something you want to say about update on jail diversion programs, we'd be happy to entertain that, or we could reach out more formally ahead of time next time. And Raylene, yes, Raylene, you want to start?
I do believe that is one of the items that we were going to have on the next legal and justice meeting, is on diversion programs being used. I know that probation was going to we were asking for a report. He said it was too soon for him to be able to do that for us at our next meeting, but wanted to postpone it to the following meeting. Darlene and Sheriff Elfo may have more information, but I just wanted to say that it looks like we are trying to get an update on that from all departments.
Sorry, I'm muted. We may have a more formal report then at our February task force meeting. And I think at steering committee, we talked about, while this is really important, it didn't need to happen every meeting, but it's been a while and it would be great to have it in February. Darlene, would you like to add anything about what's happening in the city of Bellingham with the jail diversion programs?
Not at this time. I agree with Raylene. We'll be talking about that next month. And so if the committee is fine to wait, we can update you at the next meeting.
Sounds perfect. And Sheriff Elfo, same?
Just a brief update. We were very concerned about budgetary constraints going into the beginning of the year, the first quarter, and keeping the mental health deputy program intact. So fortunately, that will be intact, but unfortunately, our mental health deputy retired on New Year's Eve. So we'll be recruiting and filling someone as soon as we can get that position up. And we're working with the prosecutor's office on implementing lead and working with the health department on the mental health diversion. So we've got a lot of different things going on at present.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything on jail diversion programs that you'd like to share with the full task force? Dan.
I'm just hopeful that Ms. Peterson can provide an update to the Behavioral Health Committee on jail diversion services for our next meeting, and the one coming up in February would be fine, I think.
I would be happy to, Dan.
According to the new calendar, that's February 16th. Anything else? All right. Do we have any other business? It seems pretty quiet. All right. I think unless there's anything else, before I call for public comment, did anyone have anything else for this meeting today? All right, well, we've got, Jill, could you explain to the folks that are in the attendees that aren't on the task force what they will do to make public comment? You're better at that than we are.
Yes, of course. We have 5 attendees with us today. If you would like to speak, please virtually raise your hands now. No one has a hand raised.
All right, I'm not aware of any other business. The only other note I had, we've sort of done, that was to thank Chief Dahl and Judge Garrett. I know Stephen and I both wanted to make sure that didn't get overlooked, as well as everyone else this year. Stephen, you want to add anything?
No, I think that does it for me, Jeff.
All right, seeing no other business, we are adjourned at 10:20 on Monday, January 4th. Have a great 2021, everyone.
Caleb, can you stay